Through the writing process, did you already, like, obviously, like I said, there's a lot of African proverbs in there from your mum and whoever, but like, how much of it did you have to go to the drawing boards and start writing from scratch, or where you go? Because I remember we had a very early conversation when you were like, I'm going to go through my previous tweets and like my most popular ones and kind of expand on them. So how much of that process was involved?
So for those who don't know, I'm a very angsty person. There's always a reason for me to be annoyed. And I thought that, you know, by the time I get to 23, I would have grown out of that. But apparently you don't stop being angsty when you are someone who's aware of the layers of, you know, systemic oppression that exists in the world affect you. And so it means that there's always something to be, you know, frustrated about because you can't change it by yourself. And so my Twitter page is essentially just like a page full of articulate venting. It's really funny. I used to scroll back and look at the old thoughts I'd put out there, and I'd be like, wow, you was going through it, babe. I don't know what you were doing, but there was a lot happening. But why I chose to use my Twitter page as almost like a pro forma to use to write the book was because sometimes in life, right, when you find yourself in a better place emotionally and mentally and even spiritually as well, you forget how you used to feel. And it's not that it's a bad thing, but it often means that it's harder for you to relate to people who are where you used to be because you're now disconnected from that feeling. But for me, I really wanted What a Time to Be Alone to connect with people who have been where I've been, or people who are where I've been, because you can't expect everybody to be in the same place you are emotionally. Some people are, you know, where you've evolved from, and that's just as okay because you are currently in the position where someone else used to be as well. So it's just about recognizing where you are, but understanding that there's always going to be someone who has it better than you and harder than you, and being able to connect to both people.
Where was that place that you were?
But when I was writing the book?
Yeah, what was that
place?
place?
The place I was referring to.
Yeah.
So the old place I was referring to was me being someone who felt extremely misunderstood. I used to be in a creative collective, and it was full of guys, and I always felt like I wasn't being listened to. I felt inferior because anytime I would voice a concern or even try to contribute to a debate, it would just be spoken over or just brushed to the side. And for me, that was a position that I contributed to placing myself in, because you find that situations that you realize that you're trapped in are because they're familiar to you from, you know, maybe your childhood in some way or another. So in my case, the grown-ups in my life when I was a child didn't really listen to me when I'd voice my emotions that, you know, required an apology. They never apologized to me, and they made me feel emotionally inferior. So it meant that as I got older, I would find myself in scenarios where I felt emotionally inferior because it felt familiar, and so I thought that was how it's supposed to look. That's how it was meant to be. I never questioned it. I would just be frustrated, but never try to change it because I thought that's just life, isn't it? You just learn to adapt. But no, you should never have to adapt to something that intends to hurt you. And so during that period when I was in that collective, I would vent a lot on my Twitter, and people would relate to it loads, and so it would generate loads of retweets and faves and, you know, all the engagement. So what I did was, now that I'm in a better place, I know I don't feel like that anymore, but I still wanted to be able to go back to those feelings. The only way for me to do that was to go and literally trawl through my Twitter and find those tweets that stood out to me where I was really going through it, and try to take myself back to where I was emotionally and write from that place. And that's why with What a Time to Be Alone, I was able to cover so many aspects of the emotional spectrum and the journey of going from, you know, healing and feeling like you're growing out of it and getting closer to your truer self, to relapsing and feeling like you've, you know, undone all your hard efforts and you've maybe reached out to someone who you swore you'd never reach out to again. But all these things are part of the process, and I had to learn to honor that. And so if I didn't refer to my Twitter page as, you know, a tool to use to remember who I used to be, then it wouldn't have been as easy for me to write the book, because I would only be writing from the place I'm at now, which would still be useful and helpful, but it will be more of me talking at people rather than talking to people at the place that they are.
And so you mentioned like relapsing and all that kind of stuff. So how did you learn to deal with the relapses? Because like, I know through my life, I've sort of gone up and down in terms of like levels of anxiety and what have you, and kind of had like really dark days, really good days, and it's like a constant ebb and flow. And it's always when you're in the harder days and the dark days where you kind of really feel up against it and you feel like, oh, I've gone backwards and etc. So what things have you had to do to kind of break through that, or, you know, to get yourself back on top and in good form?
I think for me, it's important to recognize that you're never in a constant state of being your higher or better self. It means as well that anytime I do feel like I'm relapsing emotionally, I have to give myself room to observe why. And so in my case, what relapsing emotionally looks like to me, or looks like when it's happening to me, is that I start to say things to myself like, it was your fault, or you've let yourself down, you knew better and you still find yourself in that situation. And so that's the niggling voice in my head that I hear telling me that I should have done better. But then how I challenge that voice is recognizing that even if I feel like I let myself down, what I need to also understand is that that person let me down as well. Because for me to be in a situation where I thought I felt safe and I thought I felt comfortable, it meant that that person created a certain set of expectations based on a positive pattern of behavior. So of course I would trust that rather than trying to, decipher every single thing and question things until I'm running in a circle on myself. And so I can't be angry at myself for choosing to trust and see the humanity in someone. All I can do is recognize that that person hasn't lived up to an expectation they've created, and it's up to them to recognize the faults in their own behavior. And it's not my job to try and chase them up on that, and it's not my job to orchestrate how their life turns out in response to them creating negativity in my life. It's only my job to recognize the part that I played in that situation. And sometimes it's not even a huge part. Sometimes the part you play is overlooking certain behaviors that you know are a flag. And so I guess when it comes to relapsing, I'm learning that it doesn't mean that you failed or that you've undone your work. It just means that it's a chance for you to see that you were right, and that you've got to find a lot of strength to re-implement that lesson in your life, and trust that that lesson will do you a favor, rather than thinking that going back to where you came from is better than going forward and trying to meet this better version of yourself that is very far away, but is so worth that journey.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you were talking about the kind of journey of, the self-improvement and all those kind of things, and self-awareness, and, recognizing when you are in those moments and accepting it. And, I have lots of conversations with people where I'm talking about to them, okay, you might be going through these bad days, but the more you kind of fight against it, the more damage you end up doing to yourself. Because it's like, if I push you, your natural instincts to push me back, right? But if you just let it go and just get on with it, it will pass. And it's like, we do that with our emotions and our feelings, is we try and fight them rather than actually recognizing what it is and kind of accepting, okay, this is what I'm feeling, how can I deal with it, how can I move on with it, instead of like having that constant kind of friction, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that I've always kind of tried to incorporate is a kind of self-care routine, and obviously meditation.
What's your self-care routine, Alex?
Self-care routine. So one of the things is meditation, which, as I said at the beginning, I do like every day. Exercising really helps. Reading, affirmations, like reading like affirmations to myself out loud. Various other things, but lots of different things that I try and do every day that I know are gonna kind of help me in turn. Like, do you have stuff that you do when you are in those moments, or on every day that's a kind of like mini self-care routine or anything like that you carry out?
So I have two aspects of my self-care practice. Number one is like, I don't bother arguing with people anymore. If I say what I said, I've said it, and if you don't like it, then you're more than welcome to go and argue with your mum. What I'm not going to do. Because the thing is, if I'm talking about my experience on my page and someone just lands up and says, I disagree, well, congratulations on exercising your opinion. I can't help you on that. Because you find that because you see that on the internet, when people do land with a lot of I disagree and wah, it's never to have a discussion. It's never to, engage with you and understand why you think in that way, with the hopes that they can maybe encourage you to think closer to how they think. It's more about them arriving into the argument with an already solidly formed opinion, and they're not going to try and engage with you. They've already said what they've said as well. So it means that it's just two people clanging their knives at each other. I'm not here to do that. That's not what I bought my data to do. I've got better things to do with my time. So because in the same way, it's like if two people are sat on the bus in front of you and they're having a conversation, you're not going to tap one of the people on the shoulder and be like, excuse me, I disagree. You're not going to do that. What you're going to do is what? You're going to sit and wait until it's your stop to get off and mind your damn business. And that's something we should try and practice on the internet as well, because it's still intrusive and boundaries still exist. Just because we're a bunch of floating pixels doesn't mean that, you don't need to respect that it's not your job to change people's minds. And of course, there will be certain instances where it is really important to speak up for someone. If someone is being abused and there is a clear imbalance in the power dynamic, then you've got to speak up for them. But if someone is saying, I think tea is not nice, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're problematic. How could you say that? People are dying. I'm like, okay. So that's self-care practice number one, not arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Number two is my best friend. He's really, really, really incredible. He makes so much room for me as a person to constantly check in with me and give me room to vent and allow me to treat our friendship as a safe space. And that's really important for me, because as much as I do go to therapy, I'm really conscious of not treating my friendships like therapy, because it's just not cool to do that. And sometimes people just don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with the things that you're arriving with. But having said that, it's really, really, really important to have friends that you can turn to and be like, do you know what? I've had a really, really annoying day today. This happened. And then they're like asking you, when someone's asking questions, you can tell they're asking because they're genuinely interested. And that means a lot, especially when you've had a day of maybe feeling invisible or feeling overlooked. So that matters a lot to me. And I think through my relationship with my best friend, I'm able to learn the importance of protecting relationships, and also learning that it's not always a good idea to just cut people off just because you want to. That's something that I used to do. I used to be very enthusiastic about just cutting people off. And for a while it worked, I'm not gonna lie, it worked for a while. But the thing is, when you cut people off, it also means you don't have to be accountable of the role you played in that situation. Because if you think about it, once they're gone, you can be like, yeah, they were just annoying, they were terrible, they did this to me, gone. But before cutting the person off, you still need to recognize, again, you need to recognize the role that you played in that situation. Whether it was a tiny role or whether it was a significant role, you still have to recognize that before you make that decision. And that is what allows you to actually make a move with a lesson guaranteed. And I think with me and him, we've had so many fights. And why I'm really proud that we've had so many fights is because you can often see someone's character or even notice their development as a person through how they handle disagreements or how they handle being put on the spot. And that for me has been very, very character building, because I tend to be very, very standoffish in disagreements, and that's something I'm learning to stop doing, because not every disagreement is a fight, and some people don't understand that, and that's something that I'm learning to remind myself of. Just because someone disagrees with you, or just because someone is observing a harmful characteristic in you, doesn't mean that they hate you and that you need to just punch them.
As I said, just the two.
Just the two.
It's great. Amazing. And so how long have you been having therapy for?
2.5 months. And why I chose to start was because I'm in a position where if I want to get myself, like a new pair of trainers or something, I can get it for myself. But then if I think about how much I spend on like Boohoo and Misguided, I'm like, that's therapy money. Oh my goodness. The average session costs about £50, £40 to £50 per session. Sounds expensive, but when you think about it, it means a lot, because as much as I'm all about putting your money where your mouth is and all these things, I'm also about putting your money where your mind is. I really need to look after my mind, because if I'm doing all these things like, trying to replace cow's milk with oat milk because I'm like, yay, cute, and not drinking hormones, then how am I treating my mind? How am I honoring the fact that I am a messy individual, and that me choosing to seek help is it's a radical act in itself, because the world doesn't want you to seek help. The world doesn't want you to be better. The world wants you to settle and rely on the government, which will keep you in debt, which will keep you in a position where you just don't know how to evolve beyond limitations. And so with therapy, what I do is that I use it as an opportunity to try to access the parts of myself that I can't reach through talking to my friends. So I use it as a chance to try to understand what the child version of me that lives in me needs, because every single person has like a 4-year-old version of them living in them. And that's a child that has very basic but important needs, and those needs need to be met. If you think about it, if a child is like tugging out your trousers saying they really want to drink water, you're not going to be like, move out my face, bruv. You're going to be like, oh, you want water? Let me get you some water. Do you feel better now? You're going to treat them with respect because they're fragile and they're small. But then why do we not treat our grown selves with that respect? It's because we feel like because we are adults, then we are less deserving of gentleness and kindness and care. And so when I find myself being really, really brutal to myself, I try to think, if I told a 4-year-old that she looks clapped and that she needs to change her outfit, that's not a very nice thing to do. So then if I say that to myself, then I need to remember that there's a 4-year-old living in me and I shouldn't talk to her anyhow. And so that's one of the ways that I'm learning to reprogram the way I communicate with myself. But also I'm trying to really dig into and understand the relationship I have with my parents, because we all have to understand that the grown-ups in our lives are also broken people, and that they don't just arrive perfect in our lives when we meet them for the first time when we leap out of the womb, because nobody has it figured out. And our parents, if you look at a generation that they were born into, they didn't have access to the resources we have now that allow us to even, have these conversations, or, attend really great podcasts, or have access to these really cool books that are, about self-care and self-help and human psychology. They never really had that kind of access, so it meant that they were going according to how they were raised. But then if you look at the times that their parents were raising them in, it was all about survival, and there were less conversations to do with, the diversity of humanity and, delving into the emotional spectrum. There was less of that. So it meant that they were raising us with, fear and other damaging aspects that they just thought were culture and normal and tradition.